Good evening and welcome. I am Uyai and I can come to you live from Uyo, the capital city of Akwa Ibom State, Nigeria. Today on Spotlight Africa, United Nations says Sudan's warring sides trample on international law. Genocide trial of ex-Rwandan Grand Dame starts in France. Plus, two babies rescued from Congo Lake days after floods. These stories are all just ahead on Spotlight Africa. To stay with us. Thanks for joining us. First in Spotlight Africa today, United Nations opening an emergency session of the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. Turk urged countries with influence in Africa to help end the violence. Fighting has been continuing in the capital, Khartoum, on Wednesday. Witnesses in Khartoum reported air raids and counter-fire from anti-aircraft guns. Meanwhile, this is the fourth week of fighting between Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, who commands the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces (RSF) of launching airstrikes against the country's old presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum. Residents of the city reported heavy bombing of the area, but the army has denied the RSF's claim that it has destroyed the palace. Meanwhile, the paramilitaries said they would reply decisively of 2015. Meanwhile, still on the story of Sudan, ferocious fighting between the paramilitary fighters and the military is taking place in the northern suburbs of Sudan's capital, residents have reported. The battle in Bari echoed those that took place in central that it had shot down a military fighter jet in Bari. This is yet to be confirmed independently. Meanwhile, since the start of the conflict, RSF fighters have been in control of much of Khartoum with the army. This is such a difficult situation as we begin to see that the fighting in Sudan is getting further than the capital Khartoum and getting into other suburb areas of the city. More lives continue to be lost and people are still suffering under the loss of light, electricity, internet facility and the likes. But we move on from the Sudan stories and we're looking at Rwandan military policeman Philippe Hetkikamna, who has gone on trial in France, where he lived under an assumed obtained refugee status in France and then French nationality under the name Philippe Mayne. According to reports, he had worked as a university security guard in France and fled to Cameroon in 2017 when he heard a complaint had been filed against him. He was arrested in Yaoundé and extradited to France the following year. Now, according to the 170-page indictment seen by newsmen, he is accused of actively participating in the country. Meanwhile, he has denied the charges and will face life in jail if found guilty. Several years after the genocide, several more court cases are still ongoing. People are still standing trial. What will be his fate in the next couple of days? In another development, the authorities in Guinea have released 3 civil society activists who had spent between 4 and 10 months in prison. The men from the National Front for the 2-1. The organizers of the rally say 7 people died and dozens were wounded in the clashes with security forces. Hospitals reported just 2 deaths. Now, according to reports, they were the latest in a series of demonstrations against the military leaders who have delayed a return to civilian rule, Conakry. Reports say groups of young people were hurling stones at officers and burning barricades. According to reports, at least 10 people were injured in the confrontations. Demonstrations also took place in the northern town of Labi and in Nzerokore in the southeast. Meanwhile, an alliance of opposition parties, trade unions and civil society groups called for peaceful demonstrations today and tomorrow. In a separate development, Ethiopia has in the populous nation. Safaricom launched in August last year its operations in Ethiopia, which for years had been one of the largest closed markets in the African continent, million people. But Addis Ababa opened its market in 2021. Ethiopia NBE said in a statement that the issuing of the mobile money license representative Peter Ndengwa said the company would roll out money. A magistrate has ordered that Paul Ntenge Mackenzie, into the deaths of more than 100 of his followers, the founder of Good News Nation, to hold Pastor Mackenzie, who was arrested in April, for another 3 months. But according to true, it will be recalled that on Tuesday, meanwhile, hundreds of other people have been reported missing. Away from that, the South African language speakers that it is wrong. The bank said the Pan-South African Language Board was the statutory of Kulu, dropping the N on correct, and there had been no consultation with them. But the Reserve Bank's governor is quoted by leaders in Parliament. Stay tuned for details of this and more after this time out. Thanks for staying tuned, and now to the rest of the news. In Mozambique, a man has been arrested in the central Sofala province for being in possession of a man's head and genitals. According to the spokesperson for Sofala's police command, Desio Shakati, children discovered the body parts in a plastic bag in Nhamtanda district and alerted the authorities. He added that investigations led to the arrest of the man who confessed to killing a man and then cutting off his head and genitals so that he could sell them. Meanwhile, the suspect admitting to killing and decapitating so-called traditional doctors to make potions, which they falsely claim can cure illnesses, remove bad omens, and improve the lives of people. To Tanzania now, where members of parliament have been warned not to take off any of their clothes when in debate. He had become angered during a heated session regarding compensation for his constituents who had been displaced by mining and ended up storming out of the chamber. Reports say in the meantime, Tanzania has opened its first bone marrow transplant center in the capital, Dodoma. Of course, this is great news for Tanzania. Now, according to the director, Benjamin Mkapa Hospital, it marks a milestone for the country's health sector, and the unit will focus on treating Africa and Tunisia have similar treatment programs. Sickle cell is an inherited disorder, and most cases are found in sub-Saharan Africa. It is caused by a faulty gene that affects how red blood cells develop, and the condition can cause severe pain and organ failure. A bone marrow transplant replaces worshippers, and 3 security officers have been killed in a gun attack near Africa's oldest synagogue on the Tunisian island of Djerba. The attack took place during an annual pilgrimage to the island, which attracts Jewish visitors from Europe and Israel. A guard reportedly shot dead his partner. Meanwhile, the 2 dead worshippers were cousins. They had been named by Israeli media as French national Benjamin Haddad, 42, and Aviel Haddad, 30, a dual citizen of Tunisia and Israel. Such a sad story. In a separate development, Zimbabwe's president has withdrawn an information ban on how the state procures medical and other supplies. It followed and was no longer going to make the information available. Meanwhile, critics accused the government of fostering an environment that allowed corruption to flourish. President Emerson Mnangagwa has now distanced himself from the controversial notice, saying it was placed without authorization and that the government was committed to transparency, though crossed wires appear to be at play. Let's talk about Nigeria, where a court in the capital Abuja has Judge James Omotosho, in a permanent injunction issued on Wednesday, said the NBC lacked the judicial powers to impose penalties on broadcast stations. Justice Omotosho also set aside the $1,084 in fines imposed on 45 arbitrarily without recourse to the law. Meanwhile, the Nigerian Guild of Editors has commended the court's ruling, terming the NBC's fines draconian. In another development, two babies have been read they were found floating on the debris of houses washed into the lake. Sadly, the babies' parents had died in the floods. Reports say they were rescued in different areas, one in Bushushu, another in Nkiamkubi. The medical activities are ongoing. More than 400 people are known to have died in last week's floods, according to those in the community. 200 people are being treated for injuries in local clinics following the floods, which have destroyed at least 1,300 homes and many schools, health facilities, churches, and much water infrastructure. Lastly, on today's Spotlight Africa, Senegal's opposition coalition has acted in a case. Reports say his possible elimination would significantly alter the contest and could lead to violence from his supporters. According to reports, Sonko joined other heads of the Yewi Askan We Alliance in urging followers to turn out in force for an already scheduled rally due this Friday and for another protest a week later on May 19 for elections. And that's all we have for you at this time. Do ensure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which you can find on our website, spectrumtv.ng. You have been watching Spotlight Africa. I am Uyai Anyeka, and thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your evening.